Nigeria looks ahead to the 2027 general elections. Attention is now on the newly amended Electoral Act and what it means for transparency, credibility, and voter confidence.
And the big questions are, does this law strengthen our democracy, and how ready are our institutions to implement it effectively? We have joining us via Zoom, we have two guests. The first is Mr. Mukhtar Modibo Halilu, who is Connected Development and Secretary General, Follow the Money International. Okay, we don't have him. Okay, but joining us via Zoom from Congo is Mr. Paul James, Elections and Policy Development Specialist. Mr. James, it's good to have you join us via Zoom.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Make of the Electoral Act, of course, because it's now been signed into law by Mr. President. What's your initial reaction to this?
My initial reaction will be the way and manner in which the bill was rushed, especially by the president. I would have expected a wide range of consultation, given the kind of reactions that the bill has generated in the past few days. Reactions not necessarily just from even the National Assembly, but also from the members of the public. And as we know, the law provides 30 days for the president to review the bill. This bill was just barely past 24 hours and then the president signed. So I begin to wonder, this is a bill that is over 120, over 130 pages. What time has the president got to review this within 24 hours and also to sign? Because you expect there are some implications with this bill. For instance, one of the provisions is Section 3 of the bill about funding for the election that has now reduced the timeline from 360 days in the past to now 180 days. And so that is from 12 months now to 6 months for funding to be released to INEC. I have problems with that, especially as it relates to financial independence of the commission and also planning for the commission. But again, the problem is, has the president also consulted with the Ministry of Finance, for instance, to say, yeah, they will be ready or have funds available for INEC within a 6-month window? And in the past, we also have heard stories where funds were delayed. In fact, funding for the 2023 election, according to INEC, then part of that fund was released just January before the election, barely like 6 weeks before the election. And so it gives you wondering the kind of planning we do for our election. The second part also is that you also had expected the Attorney General would have also made some input or had reviewed. And importantly also, whether INEC was also consulted by the president before the president assented to the bill. I heard the comments by the president, the speech by the president rather, and in the president's speech, the emphasis was more about electronic transmission, talking about whether or not we have the infrastructure or not. INEC had come out time without number to tell Nigerians that they were ready. As far back as 2018, INEC keeps saying they were ready for this. 2019, INEC did pilot of this even upload of results and all of that. Recall what happened between the PDP, then when PDP kept saying INEC should open up its server and all of that. In some fora, INEC said what they did then was for them as part of the planning, readiness assessment purposes, and so it was not necessarily what they did for public consumption. But be that as it may, like I said, my biggest worry with this is the way the president rushed to assent to the bill. And I hope that the proponents of this bill will be proud and will be ready for whatever will be the consequences of what had happened yesterday. Because if you look at all of this, the biggest point of contention of the bill has been Section 63 about electronic transmission of results. And what is the concern about the proviso that was introduced by the Senate regarding which the precedent from EC8A or transmitting to IRF? In the case, for instance, they say where there is no network, then the primary source of verification will be the Form EC8A. But a lot of our critics, a lot of analysts has raised concern because we were trying to run away from the human element. I mean, allowing so much of discretion. But in another breath, you are also allowing that. If we go back to the 2015 elections there, about when we used to have the smart card reader, if you recall, one of the biggest problems with that election was this issue around INEC officials using incident forms, allowing people to vote and then using incident forms. In fact, even in the current beavers as we had reports where INEC officials, for instance, because there is also the provision, I think Section 53, that say INEC should make reasonable allowance for persons with disability. So to some sense, if you think of people that don't have the thumb, how do they get to vote? And if you so allow them to use other parts of their body to vote. So we've had also reports where politicians were manipulating this and then getting people to do that. But now, like I mean, my point is what is also concerning moving forward with this current proviso is that if the primary source of verification is from EC8A, then you may have INEC officials that will collude with politicians, just like we have seen in the past. Maybe perhaps print ballot papers with the same serial number, since that is what will be relied on. And then, of course, by the time they upload whatever they want to upload, manipulate whatever they have, and then they could fill up incident form to say, oh, there was network challenges, and so they had to rely on this. So for me, that is the biggest problem from this. But again, looking at the bill, to some sense, looking at the, that is not signed into law, I mean, there are some very progressive provisions, to be honest, that we must commend the National Assembly for the taking that bold initiative. For instance, now, voters can print their voters card from INEC's website. What does that mean? It means that could likely also improve voter participation, because if you recall in the past, there was a challenge of logistics with INEC even distributing voters cards to voters, or even voters approaching INEC offices to pick up their voters card. But perhaps with this, people can, if they're so like, just go on INEC website, download their voters card, and with that, they'll be able to also participate in the election. Of course, there are also other aspects that we could also comment. For instance, also, if you look at the issue of now reviewing INEC results that are declared under duress Section 60 of the Electoral Act. Now it's mandatory. I mean, it has provided clarity that INEC officials, if this is reported to INEC
of it, Adebola, he's raised quite a number of issues. Yes, it is not a new law.
It's not a new law.
It's an amended law.
It's an amended
but
law.
Apparently, maybe parts of the amendments have made significant alterations to what it used to be.
I guess one of the reasons why, what he's saying is that he's raising the issue why the president just assented to that amended law without giving it.
That he may not have read.
Okay, I think he's back. Mr. James is back. Mr. James, okay, you are back? Okay, yes. Some of the issues you raised, I mean, the president assented to the law immediately and not having enough time to go through it. Maybe it could be as a result of the various agitations from, opposition party, civil society organizations and all that, and because of the time frame. I'm not speaking for the government, I'm just thinking. But the major issue that the president raised is the players now, the implementation of this law. What role do you think stakeholders should play in ensuring effective implementation of this amendment?
Number one, if you look now, we are actually going through a crisis of confidence in the Commission, especially regarding the integrity of the entire process. I will agree with you that stakeholders will need to double their efforts to convince voters to participate in the process. But then importantly also, again, stakeholders also that are aggrieved with what has been signed this is an amendment, so people also have the opportunity to return back to the National Assembly and ask the National Assembly to start also another review process. But what also we don't want is that the current process as initiated by INEC, you don't want disruption, because we got, as it is, planning has started already, 360 days to the next round of election. So we want the planning to continue unhindered. But like we said, what is important, is that we now have a law at least that Nigerians can work with, that Nigerians can rely on. And so I will expect to see that a lot of us voter mobilization or civic education will happen based on what has now been released or what has now been signed by the president. So the coming days will be very interesting. But what is also important, like I said, is that people will go through all of this bill, understand the contents, understand the provision and the implication to our elections and what happens moving forward. For instance, for me, what was interesting is looking at the whole section about political parties, because that is also where candidates emerged from the election. Section 84, for instance, now had what the Senate did, the National Assembly did in their wisdom, is to remove the idea of indirect primaries. You now have direct or by consensus. Or if you look at from Section 90, Section 92, it's also about money in election, raising the cost of participation for president from 5 billion to 10 billion, for governors from 1 billion to 3 billion and the like. So what is for me will be problematic or concerning is that this may limit participation, especially at that level for people that may want to participate in the election, especially when they don't have the wherewithal or they don't have that kind of purchasing power to be able to buy nomination forms. Or also engage through the process. So again, I hope we don't run back. We don't run back to what we were running away from, the idea of having godfathers in our politics, because now even for sponsorship for candidate, that has also been raised to from 50 million to 500 million. So for me, those are the aspects that I think Nigerians need to know more about. There need to be a lot of voter education around that, because the next 6 months is going to be very, very, for me, defining moment for our elections, especially when this candidate begin to emerge. So a lot of voter education need to happen. Voter registration is also still ongoing. You want to also provide education for people to make the most of the opportunity, because now for voter registration, in their wisdom again, the National Assembly has removed voter ID and also have removed driver's license as part of the requirements for people to go register to vote. So people need to know all of this before they approach INEC offices.
James, we appreciate your thoughts on this conversation. Paul James has reached us via Zoom from the from Congo, and he's an elections and policy development specialist. We thank you very much for your time and your advice. Of course, the people will have to take leadership in implementation of the new electoral law. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, and that does it for us on Good Morning Nigeria this Thursday. Tomorrow is another date. Let's keep it. I am Victor, as well. I'll see you then.
I'm Ademola. You do have a lovely day.